Okay, so here we are today on the 23rd of May 2024. Today is the transition day between the days of Holly into the days of Hazel. Each tree has about 18 days. It has 18 degrees of the year wheel. The year wheel is seen not as 365 and a quarter days, but as a circle, 360 degrees. So if you divide a circle of 360 degrees by 20 trees, each tree gets 18 degrees. So this year, 2024, we're looking at different gods and goddesses that correspond or may correspond with each tree of the Ogham. This is our third year. If you go on the Ogham Grove YouTube channel and look for birch, rowan, hazel, apple, whatever tree you're interested in, for 2022, you'll get the basic lore. So if you put hazel tree 2022, you'll get the basic lore about the hazel tree. The following year, we looked at herbal medicine. So if you want the medicine of the hazel tree, put in hazel 2023. So this year, 2024, we're looking at which gods and goddesses might relate to the hazel tree. That's the basic idea of this third perambulation around the Ogham Grove. So the days of hazel, it's 18 degrees, are very precise. All the trees are very precise because they're plotted out on the equinoxes and solstices. And the traditional classical way of doing that is to use the 12 signs of the zodiac. For instance, summer solstice is the first or 0 degree of Cancer the Crab. So this illustration shows Apple at the 12 o'clock position. That's holding the summer solstice. It has the last 9 degrees of Gemini and the first 9 degrees of Cancer the Crab. So each tree has 18 degrees. So for the hazel right now and the star law that we're going to look at that corresponds with the days of hazel, hazel is the 3rd degree of Gemini to the 21st degree of Gemini. And that's where it's depicted here. And you can see loosely how it corresponds with the Gregorian calendar month of May and June. And so that's where we are with the days of hazel. Now, we were also looking at the classical pantheons of Greece and Rome, because they related gods and goddesses to each sign of the zodiac. So as we've already observed, the hazel tree is completely within the degrees of Gemini. Holly was mostly Taurus, had 15 degrees in Taurus and 3 in Gemini, whereas hazel is completely and utterly Gemini. So it's the only tree that is. Now, if we look closely at this chart, roughly at the 11 o'clock position, you can see the hazel tree, and the traditional Greek god for Gemini was Hermes, and the Roman equivalent was Mercury. So the days of hazel belonged in the classical world to Mercury and Hermes. The Celtic equivalent of Mercury and Hermes is Ogmios and Ogma. So I'm going to look at those. And if you're interested in Norse, Germanic, Saxon, then the Romans also considered the chief of the Germanic gods to be Mercury, which we know, of course, is Odin. So they actually saw, the Romans actually considered Odin to be Mercury, and they considered the unnamed chief god of the Celts to be Mercury as well. So Ogma or Ogmios is the Gallic equivalent, if you like. Now, interestingly, Ogma Ogmios, no, Ogma and Odin both create a writing system. I mean, Odin achieves the runes mythologically, and Ogma creates the Ogham mythologically. And just like Hermes and Thoth, these mercurial gods are to do with writing and magic and thinking, and yeah, wizardry, if you like, you know, the cleverness of it all. So take your time to just absorb this. It's a map of the days of Hazel. If you look roughly in the middle and a little bit towards 10 o'clock, you can see it says Gemini. So the days of Hazel are completely within this field of Gemini. Just to the left of Gemini are the twins, Castor and Pollux. You know, we'll come back to those. To the right and lower down from Gemini is the constellation of Orion. And we're going to talk about Orion a little bit more. Above Orion, you can see Taurus, and almost off screen at the top is the Pleiades. And towards the bottom is the bright star Sirius of the great hound Canis Major. So this is just a section of the night sky, but it's the section that corresponds with the sun and its journey along the ecliptic during the days of Hazel. So it's that Milky Way cluster. It's very, very important, because one of the roles played by Mercury or Hermes or Ogma or Odin is the same, that they're a psychopomp to the spirit world. They guide souls to the next world. And there's some star law comprehension, explanation for that. So in a more simplified way of looking at this complicated cluster, there's an asterism. An asterism just means a star pattern as opposed to a constellation. So a star pattern, an asterism, the one here is the winter hexagon. Confusingly, although these are the winter stars for the night, for the northern hemisphere, they relate to the sun's journey at this time of the year. So they're not so much visible in the night sky anymore. I'll explain that in a minute. But the sun is passing through Taurus and into Gemini. And now with the days of Hazel, we're mainly in Gemini. We are completely in Gemini. But here's a thing I just want to draw your attention to, and I'll explain it in a bit more detail further on. If you looked at the Orion figure, it looks like he's holding a bow, but like an archery bow and arrow. And his back shoulder, from his back shoulder, he has an elongated arm, a very long arm. And if you look at Taurus the bull, the head of Taurus at the 3 o'clock position, it's like a triangle, but from the triangle, there's two extended lines, which are the elongated horns of the bull, and they're just dipping into the Milky Way river. Now, the important thing here is if you look at the writing where it says Taurus, and there's a dashed line, a line of dashes, a curving arc of dashes that goes to Gemini, that's the ecliptic. The sun goes along that dashed line. And where the Milky Way crosses the ecliptic is known as a star gate. And there's two of them. There's two star gates where the sun's ecliptic and the Milky Way cross over each other like this. And they were seen by many ancient cultures as gateways to the spirit realm, that the Milky Way itself was the spirit path, if you like. So the figure of Orion with its long arm is actually pointing to the Stargate. So the horns are pointing to it, and the long arm of Orion are pointing to this place where the sun's ecliptic and the Milky Way cross each other. So it became a very important idea with many ancient cultures. Now, this is a book cover that somebody put on the Owen Grove Facebook group recently. A lady called Jan had shared it, and it was about Lakota star law. I think it's a fairly old book. I think it might have been out in the 1990s or even earlier. But looking at it very carefully, if you look at the 9 o'clock position, you can see Castor and Pollux, the twins. And if you look at the 3 o'clock position, there's a Pleiades, and the Pleiades are on the neck of the bull. And roughly at the 6 o'clock position going up is Orion. And you can see Orion's belt there quite clearly. At the 12 o'clock position is Capella from the constellation Auriga, the chariot. So although it doesn't look exactly like it, it's exactly the same portion of sky. So for the Lakota people, they're looking at this portion of the sky, which we see as the winter hexagon and the crossing of the ecliptic and the Milky Way. And the Lakota people are seeing it as their sacred hoop, their sacred circle, which within, although it's not shown on the cover, the sun's ecliptic and the Milky Way cross over. It's quite an interesting idea that two very different cultures, if you like, but tribal cultures, North American natives and Celtic tribal people, evaluating the sanctity of that portion of sky. Quite interesting. So it's just a sharing of how different cultures can see things slightly differently. So this is the same image, although it doesn't look like it, you know, it's just strange that all of the ingredients are there. There's the Orion figure with a sword in his hand attacking the bull. And on either side of the scene are two figures. They represent the twins of Gemini. They're from the Mithraic mysteries. And they're very intricate characters themselves, but simplistically, you've got the bull, the twins, and you've got a hero with a sword, which is the same. Hanging from Orion's belt is his famous sword. And the twins are at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, and so on. And here you've got Orion's belt, roughly corresponding to the 6 o'clock area, and the twins and the Pleiades are on the neck of the bull. And here you've got the warrior with the sword attacking the bull with the twins. So it's just an example that they might not be perfectly literal representations of the stars, but they are iconography of that star law portion of the sky, expressed by different cultures. So here's a thing then, we're going to get a bit more weird. So we've seen this before. I've published it in a few books, but at the bottom is the winter hexagon, or the sacred hoop of the Lakota people, crossing the Milky Way with the Stargate inside. There, for us in the Northern Hemisphere, the Celtic lands, these are the winter stars, although they relate to the sun's journey right now. It's about polarity magic. At the top is a triangle asterism formed by Cygnus the swan, Aquila the eagle, and Lyra the harp, which is also a small bird. So you have the winter hexagon, winter stars, and you also have the summer triangle, summer stars. In the summertime Northern Hemisphere, the triangle is in the night sky. in the winter time, the hexagon is in the night sky. But they're both situated on the Milky Way, the spirit path to the next world or the other world. So here's another depiction of this crossing over. So the flatter circle is like a plate, and at 9 o'clock, roughly, maybe 8 o'clock, it says Aldebaran. That's the star, the bright star of Taurus the bull. It's the eye of Taurus the bull. So Aldebaran marks symbolically where the Milky Way crosses the ecliptic. Happens between Gemini and Taurus, okay? And the other place it happens is between Scorpio and Sagittarius. So you can see that here where the Milky Way is crossing the sun's ecliptic, going high, and then it comes back down and crosses the ecliptic and goes down. So then there's poetic metaphors that Corvus the crow, Crater the wine mixing cup, and Hydra the serpent belong to the lower part of the Milky Way, as this diagram shows. And the square at 11 o'clock is the square of Pegasus. Pegasus, the horse, is at the higher part of the Milky Way. It's just from one perspective, but the main thing is that there are two stargates, one between Taurus and Gemini, and one between Scorpio and Sagittarius. So this was understood and depicted in different ways. So on the left, I've done it in a simplified way. So this is the Melusine figure between Pisces, the fish, and Virgo, the maiden. And if you look at Sagittarius, which is roughly 3 o'clock, it connects by the Milky Way to Gemini. And they're the crossing points. Now, on the right-hand side is another bit of iconography from the Mithraic mysteries, and it shows Mithras shooting his bow for Sagittarius towards the twins, Gemini. Gemini and Sagittarius are directly opposite each other. So it's just another picture form of that polarity, if you like, you know, and it's the stargates. So one stargate is the cusp between Taurus and Gemini, and another stargate is the cusp between Scorpio and Sagittarius. So then, try and forget about all of that for now. We're still looking at the winter hexagon, or the sacred hoop of the Lakota people. We're looking at the long-armed figure fighting the beast with a big eye, which is how it's told in Celtic mythology, Lu against Balor of the one eye. Now, recently on the Owen Grove Facebook group, I put a post called The Great Battle. It's a wonderful account of the Tuatha De Danann fighting against the Fomorians at the Second Battle of Moytura. The one I shared was written quite late. It was written in 1910 by a lady called Ella Young, who was a friend of Maud Gonne. Maud Gonne was the muse of W.B. Yeats. They were kind of connected with the Celtic revival, if you like, of the early 20th century. But anyway, her account of the Great Battle is quite brilliant. But it's very interesting how it kind of illustrates this portion of the sky. And I'm not even saying that Ella Young knew that. She may have. She was very well read with the old Irish archives and manuscripts. But I'll read a bit out, and it kind of illuminates the iconography of the heavens. So the Tuatha De Danann and the Fomorians have been fighting each other for a long time, for a few days. One side is getting the upper hand, and the other side's getting the upper hand, and it's going on and on and on. And it's a never-ending, intense war, like something out of Lord of the Rings, a battle between the forces of light and darkness, if you like. And then there's a kind of lull. And then all of the Fomorians start chanting Balor, 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 who's their main big monster, if you like. And all of the Fomorians channel their energy into this one monstrous demonic power of darkness, and he rises like a mountain with this one eye to try and defeat the Tuatha De Danann. And the Tuatha De Danann do the same. All of the gods and goddesses put their energy into Lu, and Lu gets bigger and bigger and bigger and rises up into the heavens, and facing each other is Lu of the long arm, which is clearly depicted in the constellation, and Balor with his monstrous eye are there, ready to rip into each other. And Lu, once he's received all of the energy of the forces of light, he casts his spear into the bullseye of the monster and is successful. After that, after Balor is pierced in the eye, he collapses down and there's just a darkness, a gloom. The forces of darkness have been defeated, but then there's a glittering light in the darkness. And I'll read her writing then. In the shapeless gloom, something glittered. It was the sword of Tethra, the great sword of the abyss. I've already explained how this portion of the sky is this crossing point to the spirit realm or to Anuin or the other world. Lu swooped upon it, and as he lifted it, the Tuatha De Danann pressed behind him and before him and about him and scattered the darkness and drew into themselves the fierceness and might of the Fomorians, so that they were girt with the powers of night and day. So the Tuatha are triumphant, and Lu has grabbed this sword from the darkness. But here's an interesting thing. He doesn't keep the sword for himself. The sword of Tethra, the great sword of the abyss, was given to Ogma. He drew it from its sheath. The sunshine ran along the blade like a river of light, and the spirits that live under the sliding green waves of the sea and the spirits of the storm wind shouted for joy. Ogma held the sword aloft, and thunderous music broke over the earth and died away among the stars. An amazing story about the triumph of the forces of light against the forces of darkness. A long-armed hero throwing a spear or a slingshot into the eye of the bull. And after the darkness is defeated, there's this amazing treasure, a shining sword, which is their triumphant reward, if you like. But it's given to Ogma. Very interesting. Given to Ogma, the creator of the Ogham writing system. Back to Mithras then. This is from Hadrian's Wall. And it shows the figure of Mithras holding a sword to the cusp between Gemini, which is where we are with the days of Hazel, the cusp between Gemini and Cancer the Crab, which is the summer solstice. So Mithras is actually using a sword in the Gemini region and pointing towards the summer solstice, the moment, the absolute moment of rising energy where light is triumphant before it descends again. It's another depiction of these days of Hazel and the poetry that goes along with it. So leave that star law aside for a moment. before we get to Ogma of Irish mythology, which was written down in the 9th century, older stories, but not written down to the 9th century. In the 2nd century, in Romano-Gaul, there was a writer called Lucian, and he described the Gallic forerunner of Ogma as Ogmios. And Ogmios is a strange character. He's a god of eloquent speech, but he has some strange iconography. The strangest is that attached to his tongue are little chains, golden chains made of gold or amber, and these chains attached to the ears of his followers. Now, I was quite amused. I've looked at Ogma and Ogmios for years, and it's interesting how you Google for something. So if you Google for Ogmios, you'll find a few interesting pictures, but French occultists and French mystics kind of moved away from calling him Ogmios, and they called him the Gallic Hercules. So there are actually a lot of Renaissance illustrations of Ogmios under the title Gallic Hercules. So here's some examples. I'm just going to flick through them. But you can see roughly the chains coming from his mouth attached to the ears of his followers. Ogmios was described like Hercules in the sense that he had a lion skin and a club, the basic symbols of Hercules. So he lion skin and club, and often with a bow, and that bow for archery. So on the left, he's got the club, a lion skin and a bow. The one on the right, I'm sorry, it's blurry. I couldn't find a better sample. Fascinating though. There's bulls pulling his wagon along, and he's sitting on it with a lion skin on his head, and he's holding his club, and chains are coming from his mouth attached to all the people around him. It's a gruesome image. Here's another one, identified with Mercury. So this Ogmios is holding the caduceus, and he has winged feet and wings on his helmet, traditional Mercury symbols, and he's attached to his followers by the chains of gold from his tongue. And here another one, he's got his lion's skin on his head, he's got his club, and he's got his bow. So there's loads of these, but they're not on Google Images as Ogmios. They're on Google Images as the Gallic Hercules. It's the same figure. Obviously, French scholars have given him a different title over the years. So writing in the 2nd century, Lucian describes the iconography of Ogmios as being very like Hercules, except that for the Greeks, Hercules is a bodybuilder. He's a strapping young man. He's gorgeous and muscly and ideal warrior and all the rest of it. He's the son of a god and all of that kind of thing. But what was different with Ogmios, two strikingly different things, is that the Gallic Hercules or Ogmios is a mature man. He's in his 50s or 60s. He's got lots of laughter lines and wrinkles. And stranger than that is he has dark skin. So he's from North Africa. You know, he's come over from Morocco to Iberia and made his way to Gaul or something, you know. So he's a mature, dark-skinned Hercules. And the explanation for this was that as much as the Greeks celebrated physical power and beauty in their heroes and their idealized demigod, for the Gauls, they celebrated maturity because of the wisdom of maturity. Very interesting. So it had all of the strength that Ogma has and Hercules has, but he has this wisdom, beautiful words from his knowledge, which can only come with age. So as much as it's gruesome, the golden chains from his mouth to the ears of his followers is a symbol, that's all it is, that they are attached literally to all of the golden words that he is saying. And they are not prisoners. They want to stay attached because his speech is so golden and eloquent. He's also leading them like a psychopomp to the next world. It's a mercurial thing, leading people on with the beauty of story and words and poetry and stuff. So in passing, here's another figure from Roman Gaul, and it looks like Odin. But it's about 500 years before Odin. However, the Romans had called the chief god of the Germanic people Mercury. And this is a Mercury figure, just like Ogma, Ogmios. Now, he's interesting because he's got a raven on each shoulder, just like the Norse Mercury figure. He's a traveler, so he helps people on their journeys. And this figure is carrying, as well as a pouch of money, he's carrying apples. And of course, the days of Hazel, Gemini, lead to the days of apple and the summer solstice. There's a recurring figure in Romano-Gaul, this male head with a bird on each shoulder. There's more than one example of it. So to Ogma himself then, the creator of the Ogham writing system, mythologically, just like Odin creating the runes, they're both tree alphabets in the sense that, you know, with the Ogham, every letter is a tree, and Odin achieved the runes by hanging in the world tree, if you like, you know, so they're very similar. And to the Romans of the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd centuries, Ogma, Lugus, Odin are just all Mercury. That's how the Romans simplified it all, you know. And what is Mercury? Mercury is this fast planet, quick thinking traveler between the gods and humanity, and will be a psychopomp leading humanity to the next world and passing messages back and forth. There's too much to go into, and it finds its way into Arthurian romance, if you like, with, you could argue, Gwydion, the tree wizard, magician. We've got all Mercury gods are magicians, magic users, spellcasters. That Gwydion himself was that. Gwydion is in the poem of the Battle of the Trees, which corresponds with the spoils of Annwn and the attempt to go into the abyss of the other world and get the cauldron, but also the shining sword, just like Ogma with the Tuatha De Danann. And we'll probably look at Merlin in more detail with the Days of Apple, because in Arthurian romance, the shining sword, the ultimate shining sword, comes from Avalon, the realm of apples, you know, and it's wrapped up in the lore of the sovereignty queen, the summer queen, and so on. So that finds its way as a shift, if you like, from Romano-Celtic times with Ogmios into Irish early medieval times with the Second Battle of Moytura and the achievement of the shining sword that points to the summer solstice, to the Arthurian romances of Guinevere and Merlin and the sacred sword of the Summerlands, Avalon. So we'll get to that when we get to that. I'll stop the presentation and you can put your microphones on and we can talk about some of those ideas. There's an awful lot there, and you could spend time looking at Ogmios or Ogma, Romano-Gallic or Irish, or Lakota sacred hoop, you know.
Having done quite a bit of Lakota work about 50 years ago, unfortunately, a very long time ago. But what I did retain from it was, and I did some jewelry and still fascinated by the Lakota four direction, the sacred hoop with the four direction lines, and which is the solar wheel, the solar cross, the ancient Irish solar cross, and many things the same with that. If you look at what the book cover showed us, there is a horizontal and a vertical connection there with the main stars of that hoop. And I don't know if the book goes into that at all. It should probably at some point discuss that.
Similar to that idea, and this I haven't seen written anywhere. This was discussions with a friend of mine called Alan Royce, but he was looking at archaeology that had been done by a famous archaeologist called Barry Cunliffe, studying Celtic things. Now, this isn't an exact dogma, but it's a general pattern with the Celtic roundhouses that they had. So similar to Native American teepees and wigwams and stuff, you know, that the Celts lived in circles. And generally speaking, the doorway was towards the east or the southeast. And they can tell from archaeology that they did all their daytime activity in the south and they slept in the north. So from that very rudimentary idea, you can say the north is the realm of dreams, you know, and the south is daytime activity, but it's got the kind of ghost of a sacred circle, the ghost of four directions, if you like, you know. Interesting that they chose to live
Christianity, modern Christianity, you know what I mean, which is oriented east-west.
Yes.
So how would that work with it's orientated north? I thought perhaps it was the North Star or something, but how would that fit in then with what you're saying, because of the entrance being east and the north being the place of dreams? And
yeah, it's not a definite dogma or anything. It's most roundhouses and also stone circles and things and dolmens, their entrance is towards the east or southeast.
yes, sunrise and yeah.
I think with the roundhouses they lived in, if the entrance is roughly in the east, daytime activity like cooking and crafts in the south, sleeping in the north, then the west is where they kept their belongings and their treasures and stuff. And yeah.
And I think that the prevailing winds are often southwesterlies.
And
so you wouldn't have your door into the prevailing wind, you'd actually have the
right.
Yeah.
And the east because of the sunrise.
Yeah.
For the new inspirations of the day and your intentions for the day.
Yeah, the Lakota would think of the dreaming bear, you know, the bear hibernating in the west, and that being this place of great mystery, the waters, the depth of the ocean, and all that kind of similar coming into that Celtic water also in the west. It is fascinating. They're very similar that way.
Some of the nations do that with the west, like the Southlands.
That's really interesting because that also the light and on the water is one of the symbols of Bridget and the goddess, which is a very powerful one here and in Ireland, of course. But that seems to be an incredibly powerful symbol of information coming into our whole water body in the planet at the moment as well. I don't know if people have heard about that. But it's a really powerful magic, the light and the water, coming into the water.
I like thinking about it that you know, the grove is a circle and the yew trees in the north and the apples in the south. And I kind of look at the Iron Age roundhouse and think the yew trees in the dreaming quarter, you know, and the apples are in the cooking cauldron area. And stuff, you know. Yeah. And archaeologically, the Romans tended to build in squares and rectangles. So you often find a circular formation and then a square plonked on top there. And, you know, Celtic artwork is spirals and circles, and the Romans have little square mosaics. They're almost like square mind and circular mind that people.
Yes.
Yeah.
And how does Gwynap Neath fit in? Because he's the sort of psychopomp of the Welsh Celtic.
Yeah, definitely. So I think, I mean, I've written about this, but I haven't delved into it deeply, and I don't want to patronize people who know more than me anyway. But there are many different Native American tribes, and one of the problems we have in the West is people just say Celtic like it means anything. It doesn't mean anything. It's really frustrating. There were many different Celtic tribes. And they were different as the Lakota are to the Hopi, as the Apache are to the Navajo. They're as different as that, you know. And so they've all got their own way or story, and so they might have commonality, that they're Celtic culture, but they're different tribal groups. So they therefore have different names for the goddess, different names for the winter hunter constellation. So Gwynap Neath or Lu or Lugus, you know, or Rhiannon or Rosmerta or Brigantia, you know. So that the reason for all the different names, I think, is because they're different tribal pools of origin. You know? And so, like, you can't, you know, it's one of the it's really wrong to say American Indian, because it doesn't mean anything, and they're not from India. And equally, Celtic is the same. We're stuck with it. You know, it's what the Romans and the Greeks called everyone else in Northern Europe.
But it was unfair to smush you all together into Celtic.
But we still use it, and now we use it to describe Celtic folklore or Celtic music and stuff, you know. But there never was one Celtic mythology. There were lots of different tribes. So just like star lore can help us date something, you can say it's Bronze Age or Age of Taurus or Age of Aries, that kind of idea. The different stories can help you define cultures. So the gods and goddesses of Wales, for instance, are different in South Wales, different in North Wales. Rhiannon is South Wales. Arian Row, North Wales. So they're
right.
Graphically different.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, once there were British tribes all over British Isles, then the Romans came and scattered things around. And then when the Romans left, the Saxons spread and pushed all the Britons into the Welsh mountains. So what's South Wales came from Somerset, Dorset, you know, that area went into South Wales. And what was in the Lake District and Northern Britain went down into North Wales. So they've carried different gods and goddesses and stories with them.
And ways of doing things, yes.
So yeah, Celtic's really tricky topic because it also means what century you're talking. You know,
Yes.
W.B. Yeats in the 1800s is Celtic. You know, it's no less Celtic, it's just Victorian.
Victorian Celtic.
Yeah. So that's how vague the word Celtic is, you know. The wonderful Riverdance theatre is Celtic.
Yes.
Just like the Scottish football team. It's a phrase that tells you not a lot, really. You know, or roughly, it's like saying Northern Europe. You know, so like
Throw them all together.
Celtic culture, as far as artwork goes, and jewelry and armor, has a continuity from Spain to Ukraine.
Mhm.
You know,
Oh,
so
look at America. We're the
Even
great
from
one.
Portugal too,
Yeah.
in the north of Portugal.
Mm.
and the
Switzerland.
difference between Ogmios and Ogma is about 800 years.
Mm.
You know, equally in the 2nd century AD in France, you had Lugus, and then 800 years later in Ireland, you've got Lou. You know,
Yeah.
so Ogmios, Lugus, and then Lou and Ogma. There's a continuity
Yeah.
or a similarity between tribes.
Yeah.
And so Gwyn ap Neath, sorry, back to your question, Gwyn ap Neath is South Wales, Somerset.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
What's interesting too is whether it's the winter hexagon, the Lakota sacred hoop, or the summer triangle, the stars of roughly midwinter and midsummer are those stargates. Quite interesting. They're the portals to the next world. You know, so the Welsh poetry about having an adventure into Annuin or finding the sword in the abyss, you know, it's the same poetry, really.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's only one sword in the heavens. There's no other constellation with a sword, only Orion.
So when I was just looking at what you said, and so Orion has the sword on his belt.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
the belt depends how you wear it, is your waist, but it's kind of around this area, around the belly button area, isn't it? So it's around this belly button.
Hara. The
Yeah,
hara.
the hara. Hara on a man would be his hara, but a woman it would be like her womb space, wouldn't it? So we've got this birthing hara, the breath of this area here, and the sword's there. And then as we're looking at the sword and the light on the sword, I know people who've done work with the Pleiades. He's a Brazilian guy called Juan. Very, very good channels, the Pleiades. But I've watched him. I've worked with them, and I've watched him. And when he does his work, he kind of moves his head out the way and really exposes the neck like this, like there's a channel down the neck. So when you were talking about the bull and the sword on the neck, I was seeing that neck as the dragon rising. The one would see sort of the rising up the spine, or you would see it sort of the summertime would be the George land to the Michael on the hilltop. So the dragon would be rising. And then obviously when you get to summer solstice, well, not obviously, but when you get to summer solstice, this is when it turns. So the energy would start to descend again at summer solstice. But as I was looking at cutting of the neck, maybe I was thinking, well, Ogma's got chains on his tongue, and your tongue is from your mouth and comes down. But even the word sword has the word S, like a snake or a kundalini, and then it's word S, word, the word of man. You know, the Oum, the word of something. So they've all created with like Thoth would have Seshet. So Seshet would pull out the red cord, but Thoth would bring the dead to the people. So I was thinking about this cutting, and I was thinking, well, actually, maybe it's showing that to open that area and let the blood out, or to open the area showing the Stargate. So the Stargate is in this area here, where the brain, the computer system, doesn't override the naturalness of the way the body is. You know, we can take over from our computer system in our brain sometimes and start analysing everything. And actually, you know, it's sort of saying, you know, get the mind out, get that out of the way, and work with heart expansion. You know, with that. So I was just looking at that with the with why it was on the neck, and also the sword is here on the hara and the womb. So it's the birthing through. And the Pleiades is on the neck of the bull. So I've seen this man working, and he went, what's the pyramid in Brazil? It has the rainbow serpent, sort of channeling the dragon, and the rainbow dragon. That's it. Forgotten the name of it now. It's a feather serpent in Brazil area, South America. So I was just thinking about this neck. It seems to be quite important because that's where your tongue is as well. The neck. So much goes on in the neck. You know, rather than analysing everything, just to channel through your intuition and birth through.
That's really interesting. Yeah.
I was thinking,
Is he speaking to their ear?
the chain goes from his tongue to their
Tongue.
ears. They're attached like earrings. These
Right,
from the
but
chains.
Is
But I
it
was
thought
thinking,
to
I
be
was thinking what
expressed
Bridget
along that
said
chain?
about the sword and taking the S. So you had S and then word. And I
Yeah.
was thinking about Ogmios being a god of beautiful speech and eloquence, and that the pen is mightier than the sword. You know,
Yes.
that really Ogma is a god of the pen, the god of the writing is mightier than the sword. And of course, to do Ogham writing in wood, you have to cut it with the knife. And there's a poem somewhere that describes the knife of Ogma as being the mother of the Ogham.
We
Oh,
have
better.
spoken about the hazelnut. Now, the hazelnut has always been seen as wisdom.
Mystery.
And when we think of Mercury flying with the wisdom, so we are being spoken the word of wisdom, but we are also needing to listen with the ears of wisdom too. And I thought that the whole thing is in a nut, really. In a nutshell.
Oh, good pun.
We're all nuts.
We are.
In a nutshell. Yes.
In a nutshell.
That's another funny little pattern that Hazel is the 9th tree in the Ogham. And there were 9 hazelnuts.
Exactly.
Oh, yes, that's interesting, isn't it?
Lovely little poem.
That's
Yeah.
like a completion number, isn't it? 9, because at 9 you start again with 1 and 0. So Hazel completes something, and then Apple brings it through. And as you were talking, ladies, I think you wrote it on the Facebook page about why is it 7 when it's only we can only see 5. So
Right.
yeah, I don't know if the eyes only see 5, but you know, everything, it's not always about the eye seeing it, is there? There's another inner vision. So, but when you said 5, I was thinking, is that 5 again, that pentagram again? It's ladies and the 5 pentagram.